Nobody ever really gets taught how to delegate. We're just expected to somehow know intuitively how to do it. Everybody should do it exactly the way I did it because that's what got me promoted to being their manager. And that's where the problem begins.
In your own words, Jonathan, what is micromanagement?
I think it's got to do with trust and a lack of trust. So the person that's doing the micromanaging often doesn't usually know they're doing it. It's the perception of how work is being given or delegated, and it's really around trust for me.
Have you got a surefire way of you say, actually, when should you not delegate tasks?
Just because I can doesn't mean I should. There's a little phrase I like to use, which is with, not to or for. So we want to do work with people, not to them and not for them.
What tasks to delegate? I feel like this person can complete it 70% as good as I can complete it. I delegate it.
Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Nathaniel.
Welcome back to Breaking the Chain. Today, I'm really excited to be welcomed by an amazing guest, Jonathan Bennett. He's actually an executive advisor, personal mentor, strategist, and he's authored 7 books, which is incredible. And he spent his years developing in the trenches of leadership, from large executive roles in a large hospital to founding and scaling his own successful B Corporation management consulting firm. And along the way, he's discovered a lot about the fact of how leadership isn't just about solving organizational challenges. It's about supporting the people that steer them. And that's what drove me to having the opportunity to bring Jonathan on the program. Very much enjoyed our conversation leading up to this episode. And it's not a surprise to me that he has his own advisory practice, and he mentors, advises founders like myself, CEOs and C-suites, and helps them navigate the pressures, doubts, and high-stake decisions of leadership with clarity, purpose, and integrity. Today, we've brought him on to discuss an interesting topic that I think both of us have experienced in both our professional lives and with the people we get to impact and coach, around the balancing act between how do we effectively decide between delegation and micromanagement, and where is the gray area in between? So, Jonathan, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Nathaniel, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
When we first started talking about this topic, I know we were talking about a range of topics when we first got started, but when I say to you this, because I know you initially had a bit of passion around this topic, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when we think about how people maybe interpret delegation versus micromanagement, and maybe the underlying issue as to why maybe it can be so complex, or why teams can sometimes be, I guess, mishandled or mismanaged?
Well, I think the primary thing is that nobody ever really gets taught how to delegate. We're just expected to somehow know intuitively how to do it. And we come up through whatever domain that level of expertise, maybe it's out of university or just personal kind of like attunement to things that we're good at. And we get really good in a domain, and we get better and better and better. And then at some point we get so good that somebody says, you know what, you're so good at this, you should be in charge of the team now that does that thing. And you think, wow, that's so amazing. I've really risen. So now I'm the manager. And yet your job just fundamentally changed. It has almost nothing to do with what you were doing that allowed you to get the job. You're now in charge of people and all of the responsibilities that go along with it. And so I think that's the most complex part, is that, people just find themselves suddenly needing to know how to delegate and how to manage folks. And so their instinct is to do what they've always done, except louder and bigger, which is everybody should do it exactly the way I did it because that's what got me promoted to being their manager. And that's where the problem begins.
Yeah, and I think there's almost an element of, I know best, this has worked for me. I want to see this replicated exactly. I remember we're having this chat, but when I was starting in recruitment and I had pivoted out of doing supply chain and operations, I had an amazing leader who I thought was very hands-off in the fact that he always felt quite lazy. He would always ask me reflecting questions, which now later down the line, I realized made a lot of sense. But he would give me reflective questions. But what should we do? Or what would you do? And I remember giving a response and him going, yeah. And it used to be such a small interaction that eventually I was like, I don't really feel like I need to bring this to him, which was obviously the underlying strategies. He trusted me and able to get things done. And I think that's the harder piece. It's probably the element of being able to let go, especially if it's an area that you've oversaw directly before you've been promoted, and potentially but then, as we mentioned, there's the issue between, well, how much rope can you give someone to where, are they getting enough opportunity for growth? but are they also being given clear direction?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about like the definition of management, I mean, it's by and large just sort of getting work done through other people.
Yeah.
And that's how, the word scale gets thrown around a lot, but really, I mean, that's how we get more done, is getting work done through other people. And so there we were, an operator doing really well at the functional task. Now we're in charge of other people, just like you were. And you had this great boss who was able to ask you open-ended questions, but in a structured way. I'm sure if you gave an answer that, really was not going to work and or would get us into some trouble, he would, of course, correct it.
Yeah.
But if it's within plus or minus an okay amount, he's allowing, or she is allowing you to be able to learn your own way, develop your own skills, and of course, start to make decisions for yourself, which is about accepting accountability and responsibility and all those sorts of things, up your level of interest and engagement in the job, because you've got some skin in the game. You're making decisions. You're owning some of the choices that you're making around how you do your work. And I think you're lucky to have had somebody that had that kind of insight and wisdom. And that's really what we're all kind of going for, is to sort of set the boundaries and the parameters within which people can do their work and allow them to come up with ways of doing it that make sense for them. And as long as it's not going to be wrong, hold us back, set us back, or, cause financial loss or, hardship in some way, allowing people to just kind of like do it their own way is a great lesson, because sometimes they'll figure out ways to do it better than you did it.
Absolutely. And I think maybe let's take a step back. And I think it's always helpful. You were defining management. So let's define micromanagement. I had a very interesting call with one of our coaches earlier this week, and they were discussing with an individual how it was perceived when we talked about managing priorities or, making sure that people have the right direction. And sometimes we think, well, what is am I micromanaging by giving these pieces? So in your own words, Jonathan, what is micromanagement?
Yeah. I mean, people are really scared of doing it. And that's the first thing. It's got such a bad rap, and maybe for good reason, right? I suppose to answer your question, I think it's got to do with trust and a lack of trust. So it's micromanagement doesn't often happen. The person that's doing the micromanaging often doesn't usually know they're doing it. It's the perception of how work is being given or delegated. And it's really around trust for me. If somebody is coming back way too frequently with way too short a rein, on the task, and if I need that, I won't interpret that as micromanaging. I'll interpret that as care and thoughtfulness. Maybe brand new. Maybe I've never done this before. So that's not micromanaging. That's good managing. If I've been doing this a long time, I'm insulted, and I interpret it as you don't trust me. And so it's very context dependent, and it's really it's relational. It's about the two people, or the team and the manager, and what their relational dynamics are. And, the trick of it as a manager is to, really be self-aware and to know how much care and attention and boundaries and check-ins and the frequency does this person or group of people need. And as their competence builds, how do I relax it? And how do I give them a bigger container to operate within? So as we said earlier, they're going to contribute more, have more skin in the game, take on more accountability, more pride in their work and in the results.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. You touched on it, but it's how you make someone feel, I think. How someone's receiving that message. I think many times micromanagement shows its head or rears its head with like over communication, or like, for practical examples, I've seen team members who could send me that email first, let me read through it, and they're picking out things that are probably not their own tone of voice, right? Which is like, oh, okay, send it the way you want to say it. But they're usually minute details is what rubs people the wrong way, and if you feel like you're stifling creativity and enjoyment for the role, those are things that you can, reflect back with your team. Sometimes there are elements of, we work with some clients in space sectors. They're actually rocket scientists, right? So a lot of that stuff does need to be checked and double checked and checked again. But I think it's very much about how you're making that individual feel, giving them context as to why this particular task needs to be, scrutinized, because I always get the feeling that if you haven't given a detailed enough brief or haven't given someone enough context or structure, you usually dump like 50% of what's in your brain on a task, make a load of assumptions on what that person knows, and what they don't know. And then when they give you something back that's not fit for purpose, you can find bad managers will be like, oh, give it to me, or let me have it back, or I'll fix it, right? Rather than reflecting and going, maybe I just didn't give a clear direction. Maybe there's an issue with actually how I've presented this, which you are obviously mentioning.
Like that little loop that you just described is one that everybody sees all the time, right? Like I've got all of this experience, especially if it's in my domain that is in my head, and I'm going to only give you everything else is just so obvious to me. So I'm just giving you the task. But if you're newer to this, or you come at it from a different way than I do, then all you're doing is, potentially at best meeting my expectations. Well, like no one's getting a gold star for that, right? And so it's really, we just get into that loop. And then of course it gives you all of the stuff you need to come in there and swoop in and be a hero and save the day, like you just said. So to me, like the way out of that loop is about building agreements with people, and it's getting curious. So instead of, here's the brief, I'm going to just info dump at you, and hopefully I say all of the stuff, and then you come back and you at best satisfy my brief, but probably you won't do it well enough. And then I get to swoop in and save the day and remind myself how good I am, and also teach you that you only need to get it 50% of the way there, and I'll just finish it because that's deep down what I really want to do. Like that loop. How do you break that? You sit in the pocket and you get really curious. You ask questions like, okay, we've been given this brief. Here are the basic outlines. What do you think the first few steps should be? And then you just wait. And the person's going to be like, oh, I guess, we should probably create a Gantt chart. We probably need some inputs. I guess this has a few phases. And you're like, cool, you should be writing this down.
Yeah. Power of the silence, isn't it?
Then they're activated, right? Like they're building and they're making and doing, and you're watching and you're asking questions and they're building and you're tweaking and tweaking as they're building. But they were the ones that did it. They've got the pen on this and you're observing. At the end, you can say things like, hey, where might be the pitfalls along the way? Like you can strength test what they built. How might you need my help and when? What kinds of things might I be able to support you with? Oh, okay. So at the halfway point, you want a deep check-in. Great. Let's put that on the project plan or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, it's just don't want people feeling like they've been dropped in the deep end. And then I think it's very hard for someone to, here's a task, crack on with it, but without that proper context or structure. And I love that reflecting with people and actually helping them build a plan together, as you were mentioning. So let's look at this problem holistically. What's some action plans that we can put in place? What's the structure you would suggest? But also it's stress testing it for yourself as a manager to go, yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident, rather than just going, here's something I need you to do. Here's how you will complete it. It's almost involving them in the process.
Yeah, it really takes some practice, because when you know how you would do it yourself, it takes much longer to do it this way, but it's a bit of a go slow so you can go quickly.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to delegate and you're trying to build this person's strength and you want them to be able to do this themselves without you in due course, then you are going to have to be patient as they build it slowly with a few lumps and bumps. And instead of problem solving, just be really curious and just be really kind and just sit in it and let them, maybe stumble occasionally or not quite do it. Like they're going to feel a lot of accountability if it was their hand on the pen, if it was their, creation that they're implementing. And so that's the tough part. The tough part is to just keep the horses in the barn and to just not leap in and like be the problem solver, because, that's our instinct. Yeah.
And you want people to get that experience, because the more that you do a task and you learn and you fall, we know that's how people really retain it, rather than being told what to do. I've had so many times with teams of mine where I've gone, go, give it a go, because if I tell you definitely don't do it that way, you kind of know there'll be some lingering thought or theory in the back of their head, but actually making mistakes, especially in the case of like sales. I mean, it obviously depends on the task, but for my teams, I've gone, they've tried a new way they want to approach a contact or a client, and there's no exact method. You can give people examples and structure and ideas, but I like creativity and I like people taking new opportunities to give something a go. If it doesn't work, what's the fallout? There's a really interesting stat I heard. I was listening to another podcast and someone was saying, how do you know what tasks to delegate? And they were saying, well, if I feel like this person can complete it 70% as good as I can complete it, right? I delegate it and I take my foot off the gas and I let it stumble, because I know that 70% will be good enough. And actually they'll grow to that 100%. And I thought that was quite an interesting approach to it. Have you got a surefire way of you'd say, actually, when should you not delegate tasks? I know we're getting more into the nuances of supervision, but
Sometimes I think about it, things that just because I can doesn't mean I should.
yeah,
So there's tasks that I know how to do, but maybe I don't like doing them. So I'm just slow to get to them, or I don't enjoy it. And so for me, offloading that and paying somebody else to do it is great. That makes my life, it means I can do more of what I'm really good at and less of what I either not good at or don't enjoy. The funny thing is, of course, there are things that you don't know how to do that you have no trouble delegating.
yeah,
So, I've got a client that's a COO. He came up through human resources, but he has finance underneath him. And so he has no problem delegating on the finance function. I mean, he's in their hands. Like whatever they say to him, he's like, okay, that sounds great. What else would you do? What did the last guy do? What's your best advice? Like he's terrific at that.
yeah.
HR function he came up through, he's all over them, and he won't let them do their work. So like the lesson is like just sort of be brand new to it, and then you'll be deeply curious. You won't be holding on to all of that stuff. So I think I look for those sorts of tells along the way. Are there things that I'm holding on to because maybe I like doing it, maybe it gives me like that jolt of dopamine because I'm still really good at that thing that I used to know how to do. Like I came out of corporate communications, right? Way back when, like that was sort of the channel that I came up. And like, I can still write a killer brief. Like I still know how to do it. Should I? Absolutely not. But from time to time, I'll be like, what, just give me that. Like, you just like, you still want to see it. Do I still got the chops, And
You enjoyed it. That's the thing. Like
I know, like, but it's like, it's not the right work for me to be doing. Yeah. And I know that, and, other people know that. So I think it's like just paying attention to like what the driver is around your behavior, around what's drawing you to that.
I really like that. And I think something I would also mention for leaders listening in, because you touched on it, which I think is interesting. You think sometimes we think if I offload this, I can be more effective. But you do realize that some tasks you might think, oh, I'm giving these admin related tasks, or, if you've picked up an EA or a project manager or someone in your team and you start dumping stuff that are not particularly fun tasks, that delegation can get quite laborsome, right? Someone's like, I only keep getting dumped on stuff that, Nathaniel doesn't want to do or Jonathan doesn't want to do. And great, he's doing well. And you've got to make sure you mix it in with stuff that they're interested in and passionate about. And, because sometimes obviously for a business need, and this goes without saying, as you start to move into more senior roles, there are things like you were saying, Jonathan, that you're doing in a communications role, but actually you're not being paid to do that role anymore. So the more you keep putting time into that position, the more you're being paid for two roles, or, and that's just, it's a bad business decision overall. But actually being able to properly delegate and then being able to give someone a mixture of tasks and projects that are going to keep them motivated and excited also is really critical.
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of like a return on investment. If you think about yourself as, like paid labor, whether you're self-employed or whether you work for somebody else, like, you have some imaginary billable rate or a real billable rate that's in your head, right? And if you're doing the wrong work that somebody could be doing at a cheaper cost or quicker, then it's probably not the right task. And, that's sort of like a way to strength test, am I doing the right thing? Because if I was to pay myself for this, how much would I be paying myself to do this? So that's just one way of kind of thinking about it.
Let's revisit the agreement building piece. I think that's something that people can step away with. And I think there are some practical steps you were talking through that I think is important to just reiterate. You were talking about, instead of the dumping the tasks piece, the benefit of building this agreement in practice. What are some step-by-step breakdowns to how someone can implement this tomorrow? So if you were saying, I think you had mentioned a great way to start is giving an idea of when the project is due and then asking for the individual for what their first step is. So would you say it's actually just stepping in? How then would you break it down for someone? You were saying it's a skill that's hard to learn, but how could someone practically introduce it in their next one-to-one?
Yeah, it's great. So it's kind of like a coaching mindset. Imagine, maybe you've been in therapy, maybe you've had a coach, maybe you've just seen folks that are good facilitators. So what do? They show up, they have an agenda, so they've got a framework, but they don't do the work of it. They just hold the container of it. And so that's kind of the orientation. That's your sort of stance as you're coming into this. So I like to say, hand over the pen. This is especially true. We've socialized women to a lot of times just be the note takers. And that's that's deep patriarchal stuff that's been going on for a long time. And so I have clients who are amazing CEOs and they still take notes in meetings. Now, there's a difference. There's you taking notes for yourself because that's how you think. That's fine. Not suggesting that you change that. But if you're the one sending around the notes after the meeting, like you're the record keeper, that is not CEO work. And I'm trying to unwind that with, a client right now. Like it's just a bad habit. So like think about that, but pass it on to your one-on-ones. So you've got, or if you're doing a team-based project. So you're showing up and you're saying, okay, here's the basics of the brief. Who wants to have the pen on this? Who's going to take notes? Great. Would somebody else like to chair this if there's multiple people in the meeting? Like, don't chair the meeting. Just be an observer. If it's just a one-on-one, you're just asking questions. So what do you think the first few steps should be? And then wait. Your silence, you get good at being silent. What comes to mind? Okay, there's a place to start. Tell me more about that. Interesting. Okay. What if you were to break that down into smaller chunks? Like what would be the first few chunks? Okay, cool. Hey, that's a good one. You should write that down. Great. Okay, so we've got a couple pieces over here. I'm wondering about what comes before that in your mind. Oh, right. We would need a document discovery. Oh, right. We would need, cool. So what are the steps there? Great. So now there's like 8 steps, I think. Like how long is that going to take? Cool. What other resources might we need? Do we need to pull any other people in? What's the budget that would be associated with it? So all the stuff that's coming naturally to you, if you were going to do it, turn them into questions. Because what's happening in the brain of the other human is that they're sitting there actually activating their imagination and their curiosity, and they're building this project. And at the end, they've written all the stuff down. And then you're going to say, cool, will you type that up and email it to me or send me your document? And then it just happened 2 ways. A, they got to write it for themselves in real time. Then they got to edit it to clean it up. Then they sent it to you. So now you have a written record of what happened in their head that you can then check. And then you can email them back or whatever tool you're using. And you've got that a written record of the back and the forth that's scoping out this thing, that's shaping out this task or this project or whatever it is. All of that is activating like their sense of accountability because they built it, because it was their idea, because they said the stuff. And you just agreed with them. So that felt really, really good to them. They felt engaged. They felt heard and seen. They built the thing. And then when they start to do it and they execute on the steps, they were the ones who kind of like with a lot of help and prompts got out. Makes them feel good. Makes them feel really, really good. And it gets in deep. They won't need that much help the next time they have to do it because you built it out for them, like built out the structure for them, but they did the work of designing it. So that's actually a lived experience now that they've had. And all of those things at some point happened for you in the past. Either you figured it out yourself or some other mentor got you there and you've erased that from your mind. You just like kind of get it now. Like we all have this like erasure of how we learned. We think that we just arrived knowing all the stuff that we learned. No, we didn't. Remember what it was like in the first few months of your first job? Like you didn't know anything. You were faking it and you were hoping nobody figured out that you had no clue what you were doing. And that's what it feels like for a lot of us in any new role is that, when you go into a new company, like what's happening in your brain is, oh my God, this is different than where I just came from. What are the rules here? Is this safe? Are they actually as nice and as cool as they were in the interview process actually now that I'm here? Did I make a mistake? Is the other shoe going to drop? Is this going to be just like my last boss that was crap? Like what, all this stuff is happening. And so like, we're really good at onboarding, which is like, here's your, swipe card and your computer passwords, etc. But what we're not good is like the full kind of embedding yourself in the organization. Like it takes a year for that whole cycle to kind of settle down. And eventually you're like, and so I'm always listening, Nathaniel, for those little triggers in people's language that let me hear that they have attached. So, at month like 4, they start saying we and us instead of you. And those little moments, they're lovely little tells. You're like, oh, welcome. You're sending down roots. Great.
At Impel Talent, we've worked with thousands of people and teams. And one thing is clear. People don't fail because they lack ambition. They struggle because they don't have a safe, unbiased space to learn, reflect, and grow.
Most people are growing quietly, under pressure, and often alone. And they're asking themselves, How do I lead without losing myself? How do I guide others when I'm still figuring it out? How do I build confidence when everything feels overwhelming?
It's not that they don't care. It's that traditional leadership development isn't connected to real life. Leaders don't need more checklists. They need space to pause, think, and make sense of their experiences. Because when people feel supported and understood, clarity grows, confidence builds, and they show up more grounded and intentional.
And that's why we built Impel Connect, a space for real leadership growth, real support, and real human connection. A platform that brings coaching, community, and development into one accessible place. Because growth shouldn't be exclusive. It should be available to anyone ready to invest in themselves.
So what are you waiting for? Join us at app.impeltalent.com. Webinars, workshops, coaching, and most importantly, community.
Impel Connect, genuine human connection in your pocket.
I love that. And it's interesting now because I was having this conversation with the team last week as well, that with ChatGPT and AI and things, people do tend to want to throw a problem, right? I give you a task, go on ChatGPT, go, oh, how would I handle this task? But there was an article, a post I was reading as well on LinkedIn the other day, was saying that there are studies to show that we are potentially losing our creativeness and reasoning because all these things we used to have to try and figure out on our own, right? And gather resources and read up on things and actually then present a plan. And I think what I like about this solution with working with your team on instead of giving someone a task and allowing them to fall into that trap, you're actually walking them through and giving them a chance to kind of work it out in their head and express those skills, which I think as where technology is going, as leaders, it'll be important for us to really separate and allow people to still have that environment where they can, really work things out on their own. I've tried to do that within meetings that we have now to say, let's talk around this. Let's look at this as a group, as a challenge, and really not be like, because I did it the other day, we were like, oh, we need a new name for the Impel community, right? So we got on ChatGPT, chucked in different ones and gave us all these suggestions. And you think there used to be a time you go, oh, well, maybe I'll read that old book or I'll think about this, and I'd sit and work on it as a problem, and that's healthy. And giving someone that opportunity to do it with you is so illuminating for them. But I loved what you said. I think you said this to me last time we spoke, but it was baking in the consequences while they're going.
Oh yeah,
problems.
Yeah. So
that really stuck with me, and I love that because you've been through some of these processes, or you may not. Like maybe you're going into a meeting with someone who's in HR, finance department you don't know. But you can pose things of like, what are some of the potential roadblocks here? What have you experienced before? But talking around those things ahead of time also gives you more confidence that people have thought about how they can preempt issues and what they can do to go off track rather than needing to come, I don't want to say bother you, but come back and be checking for, which then can get to feel like micromanagement because you're always having to get involved.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you said so many great things there. I mean, the first, there's a little phrase I like to use, which is with, not to or for. So we want to do work with people, not to them and not for them. And that little phrase is like, if you're trying to like remember a little tiny little box there, like, am I working with this person or am I doing it to them or am I doing it for them? And that helps you get back to the right stance, which is a place of curiosity, a place of openness, a place of like, that coaching kind of mentality around leadership. I'm not saying that there's not a time that you need to dive in and just blast through it and get her done or whatever. But like, by and large, are you doing work with people? You talked about like the AI stuff right now. I mean, you're right. Like, but this concept of work slop that is being discussed a lot right now is that if we don't have any subject matter expertise and we just go to a large language model and we say, you're amazing, we prompt it, give me a marketing plan. It's going to give me a pretty generic average marketing plan with not a lot of nuance because I don't even know how to prompt it properly because I don't know enough about marketing. And so I'm going to go to my boss and say, here's a marketing plan. And like at a glance, it looks like it's got all the steps and all the pieces, but it has absolutely no creativity, no insight, no real like context because I actually don't know that function very well. And we're starting to see that a lot. It's giving people a false sense of confidence that they're handing in work of quality. And all it looks like is just, it looks fine, but it's actually, there's no depth. And that's where the work slop kind of concept is coming in. And I think we need to be scared of that and very, very cautious of that. Like people that have no domain expertise are throwing together PowerPoints, are pulling together strategies, and they're just crashing as they're going up in an organization, because somebody actually that does know how this stuff works looks at it and goes, "It's awful. Like there's nothing here. There's no rigor. There's no, there's no change. There's no innovation. There's no whatever it is." Right. So I think all of that's really true. And the last thing that you mentioned is like baking in the consequences. So just looping back to, the posture of sitting there and helping somebody through a series of questions design the work. One of the last steps that you can do, like a friend of mine taught me this a long time ago, Tara Landis, shout out if you are watching this, it's called upfront verbal contracts. And so you bake in the consequences of poor performance into the shape of it. And it doesn't have to be mean or anything. It can just be like, hey, I've noticed that sometimes you really struggle with deadlines. Let's assume at some point along the way here, that struggle is going to come up for you. What do you want me to do about it? Well, I want you to tell me. Okay, so if you're late on something, or I'm suspecting you're going to be late on something, you want me to tell me. Do you like it in an email? Do you want me to phone you up? Like, how do you want to receive that information? Okay, so what I'm hearing is this is what you want, and this is how it's going to happen. So if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. And the beautiful thing about baking in the consequences and designing it with the person is the chances of them actually happening go way down, because they've participated, in the punishment, as it were, with you ahead of time. And so it's really just like risk management, right? Like it's just mitigating the risks and helping the person cop to, before the accidentally bad thing has gone on, that they, it's fairly predictable. We've baked in that into the workflow. And so it won't probably happen.
It's interesting coming from two different angles, because I hadn't even thought about applying that to performance. I think that's also fantastic, because I was thinking, what are consequences from outside factors? Because then you can give people the steps and the confidence to be able to embrace some of those challenges externally. But you should also think about internally. So what are consequences that could happen from our poor performance, or things being slow, or, getting what you need from other departments? That's always a big issue with driving projects forward, right? Is waiting or stuff being stuck in the bottleneck process. But actually starting to give someone confidence of like, okay, what happens if we hit a bottleneck or a department doesn't give you what you are needing? Oh, I guess I'll just have to wait, especially a junior person. Oh, I wouldn't feel comfortable. No, think about who you need to speak to. Probably rate with this person. And then what if they don't respond to you? Oh, I'll go a level up. And you're like, perfect. You've actually got, that sounds like a great approach.
Here's your plan that you can do. And like, if in the early parts of that project design, for example, the multi-department, cross-functional project that's happening, asking that question when everybody's sitting there designing the project charter. Okay, guys, so we've all got our own work to do. We're all way too busy. What are the mechanisms that we're going to use to, deal with when things go wrong? And like, let's be honest, like, probably I won't be able to get to all the things. And so like, what do you want me to do when this happens? How are you going to communicate? And like building that stuff in just normalizes it. It just creates a sense of like, it's like you're putting the flag in. We're all admitting we're imperfect. The bad things will happen. It's okay. So then, 3 months later, when, you don't get the sign off and they're dragging their feet, you can say, instead of, hey guys, you're not doing it, you can say, remember when we agreed?
Yeah.
I'm just calling back to that time because it's kind of happening. That's a different conversation than you're not giving me what I need.
We've been addressing this obviously as a team, like a leader of a team or delegating a task. But if you're listening to this and you're in project leadership, program manager or project manager, I think what you're touching on there is an incredible way, if you have the different departments in a cross-functional team, of putting those reflective questions to the group, because people are creating their own verbal contracts as to what they would deliver on, or what they would do if they were late, or the mistakes that you would need to enact. So when you actually do need to call them up on things, it's stuff that's been documented and structured, but it's also been something that they verbally agreed to, rather than you needing to hound or annoyed because you're like, I'm not getting this from your team. And I see so much conflict in teams we work with because of that, where someone goes over their head to their leader, and all of a sudden you have this issue, but actually maybe some of those things could have been addressed just through some of the way you would structure a kickoff meeting.
Totally. I'm a big believer in joint designing of principles and then baking in upfront verbal contracts around how we're going to deal with issues before they happen and just being super honest. In the abstract, you can have a really robust conversation and people will be very forthright about where they're at and the conflicting things. You'll learn all about what's going on in their life. And then you invite them to say, how do you want me to communicate with you if it happens? Obviously, we hope it doesn't, but if it does, do you, like, are you a processor? Do you like it in writing first? What do you like? And so then you've got a signpost that you can then refer back to. Let me tell you a quick story. I was doing a multi-stakeholder project and we designed a set of principles and we knew it was going to be a quasi-political small p environment, multi-organizations all pulling for resources and protecting themselves and all this stuff. And of course, 4 months into it, the shit hit the fan. Everybody was, doing all the things. And one leader in particular had really, picked up the proverbial toys and was heading home. And another guy in the room said, listen, do you remember at the start when we said this is what we were going to do? Like, we were all here and now you've gone over there and we'd really like you to come back to the circle that you helped us build. And it was such a beautiful call in, and it wasn't blamey, but it was just a call back to our original agreements. And the guy came back and we got back to the principles. And so when it got hard, we went to first principles, and that helped us rebuild trust and everybody to kind of like take a beat and, think through how we were going to deal with that particular.
I love that story. And I also think, we always talk about I won't get off topic because we're about to summarize the episode here, but I always say to people, when you want to put a contract in place, right, whether it's an employment contract, a client or supplier contract, I always like things in black and white because it's a contract and it's actually there to protect us both. And whether it's a written contract or a verbal contract where you guys have set these things in place, these SLAs, right, that are allowing you to have feedback on what should happen at these stages, it is probably an easier call than to have because it's quite black and white if you're outside of what you had discussed or agreed upon as a group. And so by having people involved in it, by saying to that group of companies that you brought together, what should we do if one of us is not holding up our part of the bargain or is delaying this project? Do we put a call in together? All of a sudden, these little actions end up not being this like huge issue, this high level of, I guess, energy and stress and conflict because you're managing people's expectations on what to expect.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. Nice.
But this has been a tremendous episode. We've got a few takeaways I want to leave our listeners with. So Jonathan, you've been terrific. Thank you. One thing, if you can walk away from this session with, and hopefully you're on the tube or you're heading into the office and you can already use this for your next meeting, shift from telling to asking when delegating. We talked on how important that can be to help someone feel involved as they're contributing and building their own ideas. And yes, it'll take some more time, but actually treat it as a learning opportunity and a teaching moment than just a quick in and out, help me with my task. Invest your time in building clear upfront arrangements. Ensure people are on board and understand what's expected of them and clear expectations and boundaries. And adjust your level of involvement based on the employee's experience and competence. So I love that Jonathan brought this up at the beginning. Ensure that you are adapting your management style based on the individual in front of you, but also, and we talked to this, prioritizing management and check-ins and getting progress reports. These are not pieces of micromanagement, so don't be afraid to be getting more heavily involved in helping push projects forward. Think of those minute to micro tasks that are allowing someone to feel like they are not trusted or believed in to complete a task. And the last piece I would leave you all with is just encourage open communication about challenges and progress. So challenges will arise, projects will have problems, and if you can actually build into your construct, which we were talking about, baking in the consequences, then actually a lot of that open communication and progress doesn't feel like you're slashing the whip, but actually you're keeping people on track. Anything you want to add to that, Jonathan?
No, that was a great summary and it was a wonderful conversation. I know sometimes it can be hard, especially if you're newer to this. I have a bunch of resources and tools on my website. If folks want to swing by and learn more about how I do my work and the kinds of folks that I support, just feel free to drop in. I'll give you a link that you can put in the notes if you don't mind.
Please do. And definitely you'll need to come back on the show. I promise I won't be so sporadic and I'll be a little bit more structured and set up. I've noticed some issues with my delegation, I think. But it's been tremendous having you on the show. I really appreciate it. And we hope to welcome you back soon, Jonathan. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Nathaniel. Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of Breaking the Chain. If you'd like to see more episodes, you can check us out online at www.impeltalent.com/podcast. And if you'd like to perhaps put a question into us or be featured on one of our next episodes, you can email us at info@impeltalent.com. Thank you for tuning in and see you next week.